Welcome to the next edition of Grid Forward Chats. I'm Bryce Yonker. Lots been going on in the last few weeks, so we called on a deep expert in the ecosystem of what's going on federally, Neil Chatterjee. Thanks for being back onto the podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me back.
Well, last time we talked, I think you were in the chair role. So tell us a little bit about your background, what you're doing now, to remind folks of who you are.
Yeah, so Neil Chatterjee, I'm the former commissioner and chairman of the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Prior to that, spent a long time as a aide in the U.S. Congress in both the House of Representatives and working for my home state senator, Mitch McConnell, as his principal energy policy advisor during the time that he was serving as both minority and majority leader in the U.S. Senate. So have deep experience in the energy field, continue to work in the space today, just from the other side of the ledger, kind of advising companies on how to deal with the myriad regulatory and legislative issues that percolate in the energy space.
Well, former Commissioner Chatterjee, thanks for being on. I'll call you Neil if that's all right during our podcast
Perfect.
here.
Absolutely.
Of the significant legislative packages that have come out over the last few years, a number of them have been substantial for the energy and grid landscape. Where do you see these going ahead? I mean, I think that's what a lot of folks are often talking about with the various acronyms, Energy Act of 2020, Bill, IRA, all these things had significant impact on the grid. What do you think a new administration is going to do either for continuity or changes around those packages?
Yeah, look, the big one that everyone's zeroing in on is the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a package of tax incentives in the energy space, big focus on energy policy. And, I'm reading a lot of headlines and there's a lot of doom scrolling and people thinking that the IRA, as it's known, is toast. And I'm just not quite so sure. First, you take a look at how we even got the components of the Inflation Reduction Act passed. Originally, Joe Manchin, the primary author of it, had wanted to pair the tax pieces of the IRA with permitting reform and wrap it into what became the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which attracted about 20 Republican votes in the Senate. Ultimately, couldn't get there on permitting reform, and so it fell out. And the end result was, to get it passed, it was enacted via a process called budget reconciliation, which is a legislative tool designed to circumvent the minority party in the Senate so you can pass legislation at 50 votes and not overcome the 60 vote threshold in the Senate. So reconciliation is an inherently partisan tool. So everyone in the party that is on the other side votes against it. And so you had every Republican vote against the IRA, even though I honestly think a lot of Republicans, had it gone regular order, probably would have supported it, because at the end of the day, it was all carrots and no stick. And so now you've got a situation where Republicans all voted against the IRA, and their assumption is that there will be efforts to repeal it. But I got to tell you, a lot of the benefits of the IRA are in red states, are in red House congressional districts. And I'm not so sure, with the margins being as narrow as they are in both the Senate and the House, that the votes will be there to undo the IRA writ large. I think the priority for Republicans using the budget reconciliation process is going to be extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the corporate tax cuts. I think even getting that through will be interesting. Look, as the Republican Party under Trump has become more of a populist working class party, something like corporate tax cuts isn't quite as unifying a thing as it has been historically. Now, I still think with the president pushing it and with Republican congressional leaders embracing it, I think the corporate tax cuts will get extended. But I think leaders are going to have to expend a lot of political capital in the process. And then after which, if you're trying to layer on big IRA repeals on top of it, it starts to get to be a pretty heavy lift. And again, when we're talking a 53 vote majority in the Senate and maybe a 6 to 8 vote margin in the House, You don't need a majority of Republican senators or congressmen to vote to preserve pieces of the IRA.
Well, you mentioned a number of aspects in that remark, and I want to tail off on the permitting aspect that complicated the package a few years back and remains a lingering element. Do you see any chance in lame duck, or if not, or even if so, it's been a priority for a number of years, and I think is a priority even in a current administration, incoming administration. Where do you see permitting, citing, and other development backlogs that are kind of holding things up right now? Is there a chance on that legislatively?
Look, I think it's essential, right? I don't think policymakers on either side of the aisle have fully wrapped their brains around what is coming in terms of the surge in demand for power in this country. This surge in demand is going to be driven by AI and data centers to support AI and quantum computing and cloud computing and vehicle electrification, building electrification, semiconductor manufacturing, reshoring domestic manufacturing, crypto and Bitcoin mining. All of these are energy intense endeavors that will require a tremendous amount of power. And we have had relatively flat demand for the past 2 decades. And I don't think we are prepared for the coming just absolute surge in demand that's going to hit us. And in order to meet that surge in demand while maintaining reliability and affordability, we're going to need a lot more power. And in order to have that access to that power, we're going to have to build. We're going to have to build natural gas pipelines, and we're going to have to build transmission lines to get more energy onto the grid. So getting legislative permitting reform done is absolutely essential because it's too hard to build things in this country. The challenge is it's political. The political left wants transmission lines to get clean energy onto the grid. The political right wants natural gas pipelines to greater foster the deployment of gas. And it's difficult to broker a compromise. You've got Senator Manchin and Senator Barrasso who have worked out a bill that nobody loves, but it's a compromise that can actually move forward. I'd love to see it get done in the lame duck, but it's hard because I think you're going to have people on the political right who are going to say, "Hey, we just won everything. So why would we compromise with Democrats in the lame duck session? Let's just do this on our own next year." Well, you can't do it via budget reconciliation because it wouldn't survive what's known as the bird bath, the procedural process that makes sure that anything that goes into reconciliation is budgetary in nature and is not policy that you're looking to circumvent Senate process on. So that means you're going to need 60 votes. Republicans are not going to abolish the legislative filibuster to pass permitting reform. And I'm not sure that Democrats are going to be willing to cooperate, in 2025 when they're out of power. I think they're just going to oppose everything. So I actually think this is our best shot to get something done on legislative permitting reform. Look, I know Senator Manchin in his waning days in Congress is working hard at it. Senator Barrasso is about to ascend into the leadership as the number 2 Republican in the Senate, but he'll be stepping away from his top role at the Energy Committee. He's motivated. Their staffs are motivated. So they're trying, and I've got confidence in the staffs on both sides and in both of those members. But I do think it's going to be a tough lift in a lame duck session, and it could wind up being a missed opportunity.
Yep. We will keep our fingers crossed, like so many will. Been a flurry of announcements for cabinet posts over recent days, including the ones most applicable to the energy and grid community. So you got Doug Burgum as both the energy czar and interior, and Chris Wright taking the energy secretary post, which seem like positions that will be Senate confirmed. Are there any mandates that you see that are going to be clear for these folks that are taking on the leadership roles in the energy and grid space coming from the administration? What do you think is going to be at the top of their list?
Yeah, so I got to tell you, I think we're going to be surprised. Again, back to my earlier comments about the fact that I don't think we're fully ready for this coming surge in demand. I think it's going to alter the way that people think about the politics around energy. I do think there is this sense this kind of antiquated notion that if you're for fossil fuels, you're of the political right, and if you're for clean energy, you're of the political left. And with Trump coming in, it's going to be drill, baby, drill, and all fossil fuels all the time. I'll tell you right now, the Trump administration wants to win the AI race. The Trump administration wants to make sure that America defeats the Chinese Communist Party in dominating AI. And in order to win the AI race, we're going to need power to do that. But President Trump has simultaneously, promised to bring down electricity prices substantially. And so in order to do that, in order to win the AI race, plus bring down the cost of energy, we're going to need every electron available. And I think that's going to drive a lot of the decision making in the coming years. And so I think all these reporters and folks who are rolling out these tired stories about, well, it's just going to be drill, baby, drill, and anti EVs and anti renewables. Let's see. I actually have a feeling that AI and the national security need to win the AI race against China is going to have a significant impact on energy policy. And I think it could wind up surprising people.
Energy dominance is something I haven't heard before, but I hear those two words together quite a bit right now and read your recent piece. You mentioned that in regard to growing demand driven by data centers and other areas of our onshoring economy. What does that mean? I have a hard time understanding how you dominate energy. So maybe you can help me have that be a little bit more clear.
Just domestic production on all fronts, right? Like the U.S. leveraging our natural resources and our huge advantages for not just domestic economic growth and gain and prosperity here for Americans, but also geopolitically, the U.S. leveraging our natural resources in the form of like LNG exports, which provide our allies with an alternative to Russian gas and have geopolitical value. And that, oh, by the way, also help the environment because we do it cleaner and better than anybody else. And clean U.S. exports displacing more fossil-intense sources of generation, particularly in places like Asia, actually lower global carbon emissions. So it's just a win-win-win for America. Job creation and economic growth at home, geopolitical strength through energy, and positive environmental impacts. That's how I view energy dominance.
The role of federal agencies in the last few years seems like it has shifted a little bit. So can we touch a little on the role of, for example, Department of Energy? I think it's taken an outsized role to help support the grid in deploying advanced functionality, surround themselves by various stakeholders to make sure these projects can get funded and go effectively. What either continuing or changing role do you see with DOE? And then, of course, I want to talk with you about FERC too. But let's start with Department of Energy.
Yeah, look, I mean, DOE can and will, play an essential role here. And I think there are programs that DOE can advance that will focus on things like reliability and affordability. I think the incoming administration is going to be far more focused on things like resource adequacy and reliability. And there's been a sense that the prior administration, in its zealous focus on decarbonization, took their eyes off of reliability and resource adequacy. And so I think DOE can certainly play an important role there. I think EPA, there's no question you're going to see an aggressive rollback of the regulatory agenda that EPA had been promulgating the last 4 years that in the views of the incoming administration was inhibiting energy dominance and energy production. And I think you're certain to see, a rollback there. And I think at FERC, you're going to see, again, a focus on efficient market signals, on ensuring that we can meet challenges to resource adequacy while maintaining affordability in the face of this coming surge in demand. So I think all of these agencies are going to play a very important role in the coming years.
You mentioned resource adequacy. You mentioned, I think, importantly, affordability. I don't think I've had a podcast in the last couple of years that doesn't touch on grid resilience, right? There's all kinds of impacts that are happening to various communities, and the federal government seems to have really embraced that. Do you see that focus on, supporting resilient grid systems being a continuous initiative under the administration, even if,
Absolutely.
agencies shift a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, that's, again, for me, I felt my foremost obligation as chairman of FERC, and my colleagues would agree, is our responsibility for our oversight of the reliability of the grid, for making sure that when Americans hit the switch, the lights come on. And, we have taken for granted in this country that we are so blessed that the lights always come on. But we're increasingly seeing challenges to grid resiliency from extreme weather and events driven by climate change, from cyber and physical attacks, and increasingly from an imbalance in supply and demand. And we do have constrained capacity in certain regions of the country at a time in which demand is surging. And look, I think some of the policies of the Biden administration, my former colleagues at FERC, took steps, for instance, with the market seller offer cap and ELCC, which are little wonky technical things that I don't want to bore your audience with. But I think they had the effect of suppressing capacity prices that led to a resource exodus in PJM, a huge region in this country. And the end result was PJM was short capacity at a time when demand was surging and prices went through the roof. And so I think, agencies like FERC can play an important role in restoring that balance to make sure that energy remains not just reliable, but also affordable.
You mentioned transmission being a focus to interconnect renewables, but the grid seems to be a constraint just in so many different areas. Do you think that a new administration shifts its focus with regards not so much to generation sources, but the function of the grid itself, or is that more continuous with what we've seen over recent years?
It'll be interesting to see. So initially, FERC, transmission planning rule, FERC Order 1920, was voted out on partisan lines with a pretty aggressive dissent from Republican Commissioner Mark Christie. They recently approved the order on rehearing, addressed rehearing concerns, and there seemed to be more consensus, which leads me to believe that there may be, a sufficient compromise here between an appropriate state role and the federal role in transmission planning, and a recognition that it's too hard to build things in this country. We need transmission. We need transmission for reliability and affordability, and I'm hoping that we'll start to see some emerging consensus on transmission.
All right, last question. It's a short one. So if you had any advice for the incoming administration, what would you share? What would your thoughts be?
I think, again, focus on making sure we can win this AI race. Focus on making sure that we can provide the power that is necessary to beat the Chinese Communist Party and assert that American energy dominance. And I think with that focus on power generation, on making it easier to build things, on making sure that we have all sources of energy available, from natural gas plants to, in some regions of the country, coal plants, to promoting nuclear, to making sure that we've got solar plus storage, increasing their capacity factor and getting on the grid. We need every available electron. And to the extent that we support policies that better enable the production of that power generation, I think that focus will lead to great outcomes.
Former Chair Neil Chatterjee, thanks for being on with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again to our season sponsor, Virtual Peaker. If you enjoy Grid Forward Chats, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform, give us a like or a review, and tell your colleagues. You can listen to all episodes and learn more about our efforts to advance the grid at gridforward.org.